The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor of the Grand Meridian Hotel's ballroom as Maya Johnson adjusted her black vest for the 100th time that evening. The scent of expensive perfume and imported champagne filled the air, mixing with the soft melody of a string quartet positioned near the towering windows that overlooked the city skyline. Her hands trembled slightly as she balanced the silver tray laden with champagne flutes, each one worth more than her monthly rent. Maya had been working at the Grand Meridian for 3 years, ever since she dropped out of Juilliard to care for her ailing grandmother. The dreams of becoming a professional dancer had been carefully folded away like her old ballet shoes, tucked beneath her bed in the cramped studio apartment she shared with her younger brother Marcus. Tonight's charity gala for the Westfield Foundation was supposed to be just another shift. Serve the wealthy elite, smile politely, and collect her $12.50 an hour plus tips. What Maya didn't know was that this evening would change everything. The ballroom buzzed with conversations about stock portfolios and yacht purchases as Maya weaved between tables draped in ivory silk. She recognized most of the city's power players, tech moguls, oil executives, and real estate tycoons who shaped the skyline with their decisions. At the head table sat Robert Westfield, the pharmaceutical billionaire whose company had developed 3 breakthrough medications in the past decade. His steel gray eyes surveyed the room with the calculating gaze of a man who had built an empire worth $4.2 billion. "Miss, could you bring us another bottle of the Dom Perignon?" called out Mrs. Pemberton, the mayor's wife, barely glancing up from her conversation about the upcoming fundraiser for the Children's Hospital. "Of course, ma'am," Maya replied, her trained smile never wavering despite the condescending tone. She'd learned long ago that maintaining composure was essential for survival in this world where she was simultaneously invisible and constantly observed. As she navigated toward the bar, Maya's eyes caught something that made her pause. In the far corner of the ballroom, partially hidden by a marble column, sat a young man in a sleek black wheelchair. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his tailored tuxedo spoke of expensive taste. But it was his eyes that captured Maya's attention. Intelligent, kind, and unmistakably lonely. He watched the dancing couples with an expression she recognized all too well, the look of someone who felt like an outsider in their own world. This was Daniel Westfield, Robert's 24-year-old son, though Maya didn't know it yet. Daniel had been paralyzed from the waist down in a diving accident during his sophomore year at Harvard, an event that had fundamentally altered not only his mobility, but his entire relationship with his father's expectations. While Robert pushed for Daniel to take over the family business, Daniel harbored dreams of becoming a music producer, a passion his father dismissed as impractical given his condition. The live band transitioned into a slow waltz, and Maya watched as couples paired off, their movements fluid and graceful across the polished floor. The music stirred something deep within her, muscle memory from years of training, the rhythm that had once been as natural as breathing. Without thinking, she began to move subtly, her hips swaying almost imperceptibly to the melody while she worked. "You have beautiful form," a voice said softly beside her. Maya turned to find the young man from the wheelchair had approached her station near the refreshment table. Up close, she could see the intelligence in his brown eyes, the way his hands moved expressively as he spoke. There was something magnetic about his presence, a warmth that seemed to cut through the cold formality of the evening. "I'm sorry, sir, I should be working," Maya replied, immediately straightening and reaching for her tray. "Please, don't apologize. I'm Daniel." He extended his hand with a genuine smile. "I couldn't help but notice. You're a dancer, aren't you? I mean, professionally trained." I used to be, a long time ago. Would you—" Daniel stopped. "I'm sorry, this is probably inappropriate. I just haven't seen anyone move like that in years. My mother was a dancer before she married my father. She used to tell me that real dancers never stop dancing, even when they're standing still." Something in his voice, a vulnerability mixed with genuine appreciation, made Maya's defenses soften. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. She passed away when I was 16. Daniel's eyes grew distant for a moment. She would have loved to see someone dance the way you do. There's something free about it. Before Maya could respond, the sharp voice of Carl Morrison cut through their conversation like a blade. "Johnson, what do you think you're doing?" The floor manager's face was red, his small eyes darting between Maya and Daniel with obvious anxiety. Carl had worked his way up from busboy to floor manager over 15 years, and he ruled the service staff with an iron fist, particularly when it came to interactions with high-profile guests.
Maya began. "You were just doing your job, which doesn't include chatting with guests," Carl interrupted, his voice deliberately loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "Return to your station immediately." Daniel's expression hardened. "Excuse me, but I was the one who initiated the conversation. Your employee was being perfectly professional." Carl's face went pale as he realized who he was addressing. "Mr. Westfield, I sincerely apologize. I had no idea you were... That is, I'll make sure this doesn't happen again." "The only thing that needs to happen," Daniel said firmly, "is for you to treat your staff with respect. This young woman has done nothing wrong." Maya watched the exchange with growing dread. She'd seen this dynamic before, well-meaning guests defending service staff, only to create more problems once they left. Carl's humiliation would undoubtedly translate into retaliation against her later. "Of course, sir, you're absolutely right," Carl said through gritted teeth. "Johnson, continue with your duties." As Carl retreated, Daniel turned back to Maya with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry if I made things difficult for you. That wasn't my intention." "It's okay," Maya replied, though they both knew it wasn't. "I should really get back to work." But Daniel wasn't ready to let the moment pass. "The song they're playing, it's from Swan Lake, isn't it? The scene where Odette dances alone by the lake?" Maya's eyes widened with surprise. Most people at these events couldn't distinguish between classical and contemporary music, let alone identify specific ballet pieces. "Yes, it is. How did you—" "I studied music composition at Harvard before—" He gestured toward his wheelchair. "I've always been fascinated by the relationship between music and movement, the way dancers can make music visible." For the first time in years, Maya felt truly seen, not as a waitress or a service provider, but as an artist. The recognition sparked something that had been dormant too long. "It's one of my favorite pieces. The way Tchaikovsky builds the emotion through the strings. It's like he's painting with sound." "Exactly!" Daniel's face lit up with enthusiasm. "And the way the melody mirrors the swan's movements, the grace and the tragedy intertwined." Their conversation was interrupted by the band's announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join us on the dance floor for our next selection." Daniel looked at Maya with sudden inspiration. Would you consider dancing with me? I know it's unconventional, but I think my mother would have wanted me to ask." Maya's heart raced. Dancing with a guest was absolutely forbidden, especially a guest who was clearly from one of the wealthy families in attendance. But something in Daniel's eyes, a combination of hope and vulnerability, made her consider the impossible. "I don't know if I should," she whispered, glancing around the ballroom. "One dance," Daniel said softly. "I promise, if anyone gives you trouble, I'll handle it." What Maya didn't know was that across the ballroom, Robert Westfield had been watching the interaction with growing concern. He'd seen his son's animated conversation with the service staff, and his business instincts immediately raised red flags. Robert had spent his entire career building the Westfield empire, and he knew that perception was everything in their social circle. The sight of his disabled son attempting to dance with a black waitress was exactly the kind of scandal that could damage the family's reputation, and more importantly, affect the company's stock price. Robert signaled to his personal assistant, Victoria Sterling, a sharp-eyed woman who'd been managing the family's public image for over a decade. "Handle this," he said quietly, discreetly. Victoria nodded and began moving through the crowd, her mission clear: separate Daniel from the waitress before anyone important noticed. Meanwhile, Maya found herself facing an impossible decision. Her rational mind screamed warnings about job security, about the consequences of breaking protocol. But her heart, the part of her that had once dreamed of stages and spotlights, whispered that this might be her only chance to dance again, even just for a moment. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely audible above the music. "One dance." Daniel's face transformed with joy as he positioned his wheelchair at the edge of the dance floor. Maya approached hesitantly, unsure of how to proceed. She'd never danced with someone in a wheelchair before, but her training kicked in as she began to move to the music. What happened next was nothing short of magical. Maya began to dance around Daniel's wheelchair, her movements fluid and graceful, as if she were performing a complex pas de deux with an invisible partner. Daniel, meanwhile, used his upper body to complement her movements.
His arms moving in perfect synchronization with the music. Together, they created something beautiful, a dance that transcended physical limitations and social boundaries. The effect on the ballroom was immediate and profound. Conversations stopped as guests turned to watch the unexpected performance. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others simply stared in amazement. The live band, recognizing the moment's significance, extended their piece to give the dancers more time. Maya felt alive in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Every movement was precise, every gesture filled with emotion. She'd forgotten how it felt to be truly present in her body, to express herself through motion and rhythm. For those precious minutes, she wasn't a waitress struggling to make ends meet. She was an artist, sharing her gift with the world. Daniel, for his part, felt a freedom he thought was lost forever. The accident had taken away his ability to walk, but in this moment, he realized it hadn't taken away his ability to be part of something beautiful. His wheelchair became not a limitation, but a different kind of partner in the dance. But behind this moment of beauty, forces were already moving to destroy it. Victoria Sterling had reached Carl Morrison and was speaking to him in urgent, hushed tones. Carl's face grew increasingly pale as Victoria explained the situation, how this spectacle could embarrass the Westfield family, how it could reflect poorly on the hotel's reputation, and how Maya's employment was now in serious jeopardy. "I want her gone," Victoria said coldly. "Tonight, after the guests leave, she's terminated, and I want it made clear to the rest of your staff that this kind of behavior is unacceptable." Carl nodded eagerly, seeing an opportunity to please the powerful Westfield family. "Of course, Miss Sterling. I'll handle it personally." As the dance concluded, the ballroom erupted in applause. Maya and Daniel, both breathless and exhilarated, looked at each other with shared amazement at what they'd just created together. "That was incredible," Daniel said, his voice filled with emotion. "I haven't felt that connected to music in years." Maya smiled, tears of joy threatening to spill from her eyes. "Thank you for asking me to dance. I'd forgotten how much I missed it." But their moment of triumph was short-lived. As the applause died down and the band began their next set, Maya noticed Carl Morrison approaching with a grim expression. Behind him, she could see a well-dressed woman watching with cold calculation. "Johnson," Carl said loudly, his voice carrying across the nearby tables. "You're needed in the service area, immediately." Maya's stomach dropped. She recognized the tone. She'd heard it before when other employees had been disciplined or terminated. "I'll be right there," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel sensed the tension immediately. "Is everything all right?" "I'm sure it's fine," Maya replied, though they both knew it wasn't. "Thank you again for the dance." As Maya walked toward the service area, she could feel the eyes of the ballroom's elite following her. Some looked sympathetic,
Others appeared scandalized, and a few seemed amused by the drama unfolding. But it was the cold stare of the older man at the head table, Robert Westfield, though she didn't know his identity, that made her blood run cold. In the service area, away from the guests, Carl Morrison's facade of professionalism crumbled entirely. "What the hell were you thinking? Dancing with a guest? Creating a scene? Do you have any idea who that was?" "I was just—" "You were just ending your career," Carl interrupted. "That was Daniel Westfield. His father owns half the companies in this city, and you just made a spectacle of yourself and this hotel in front of everyone who matters." Maya felt the walls closing in around her. "Mr. Morrison, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain. You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out after the event ends, and don't think about using us as a reference." The words hit Maya like physical blows. This job, as difficult as it was, represented her only steady income. Without it, she couldn't afford rent, couldn't support Marcus through his final year of high school, couldn't maintain the modest life she'd built from the ashes of her abandoned dreams. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "I need this job. I have responsibilities." "You should have thought about that before you decided to turn a professional event into your personal dance recital. Clean out your locker and wait for security." As Maya walked to the employee break room, her mind raced with panic. How would she tell Marcus? How would she explain to their landlord that she couldn't make next month's rent? The brief joy of dancing was rapidly being replaced by the crushing weight of consequence. But what Maya didn't know was that this was only the beginning of a much larger story. Back in the ballroom, Daniel had noticed Maya's prolonged absence and was growing concerned. He'd seen the tension in her face when the manager approached, and his instincts told him something was wrong. Using his wheelchair's quiet motor, he made his way toward the service area. "Maya," he called out softly, finding her sitting alone in the break room, still in her uniform, but with her head in her hands. She looked up, and Daniel could see the tears she'd been trying to hold back. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "This area is for employees only." "What happened?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. "I've been fired," Maya said simply, "because I danced with you." Daniel's expression darkened. "That's ridiculous. You did nothing wrong." "It doesn't matter," Maya replied. "I knew the rules, I broke them, and now I have to face the consequences." "No," Daniel said firmly, "this isn't right. I'm going to talk to my father." "Your father?" Maya's eyes widened as the pieces clicked into place. You're Robert Westfield's son?" Daniel nodded, and Maya felt a new wave of despair. She'd unknowingly crossed one of the most powerful men in the city, and now she was paying the price. "I need to go," she said, standing up and moving toward her locker. "I've caused enough trouble already." But Daniel wasn't ready to let injustice stand. "Maya, wait. This isn't over. What they're doing is wrong, and I'm going to make sure it's made right." What neither of them realized was that Victoria Sterling had already begun implementing a more comprehensive plan to protect the Westfield family's reputation. This wasn't just about firing a waitress. It was about sending a message about the boundaries that existed in their world. As Maya cleaned out her locker, pulling out her spare apron and the small framed photo of her grandmother that had kept her motivated through difficult shifts, she reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. One moment she was invisible, serving champagne to people who barely acknowledged her existence. The next, she was the center of attention, dancing with a billionaire's son. Now, she was unemployed, facing an uncertain future. But something had awakened in her during that dance. For the first time in years, she'd remembered who she really was beneath the uniform and the survival instincts. She was Maya Johnson, a dancer whose dreams had been deferred but not destroyed. As she escorted out through the service entrance, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't going to disappear quietly into the night. She wasn't going to let this injustice stand without a fight. What she needed was evidence, allies, and a plan. And as she walked through the city streets toward her apartment, Maya began to realize that her brief interaction with Daniel Westfield had revealed something much bigger than personal prejudice. It had exposed a system of power and control that kept people like her in their place while protecting the wealthy from any meaningful consequences. The dance had lasted only minutes, but its effects would ripple through the city's power structure in ways that no one could have predicted. Maya Johnson, the invisible waitress, was about to become the most visible person in town. But first, she had to survive the night and figure out how to pay next month's rent. The revolution would have to wait until morning. The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching Maya's mood, as she sat in her studio apartment staring at her laptop screen. She'd spent the night researching the Westfield family and their various business interests, trying to understand the full scope of what she was up against. The deeper she dug, the more she realized that her firing was just the tip of a much larger iceberg. Marcus had already left for school, but not before seeing his sister's red-rimmed eyes and asking the question she'd been dreading. "What's wrong, Maya?" She'd managed to deflect her concern with promises to discuss it later, but she knew she couldn't hide the truth much longer. At 17, Marcus was already working part-time at a local grocery store to help with expenses, and his academic performance was suffering as a result. Maya had hoped that her steady income would allow him to focus on his studies and maybe even consider college, but now even that modest dream seemed impossible. A knock at her door interrupted her brooding. Maya opened it to find a young woman with short cropped hair and intelligent eyes, holding a recorder and a notebook. "Miss Johnson, I'm Sarah Chen from the City Tribune. I was hoping we could talk about what happened last night at the Grand Meridian." "I don't know what you're talking about." "I was at the gala last night. I saw your dance with Daniel Westfield. It was beautiful, and I heard you were fired because of it. I think that's a story worth telling." Maya hesitated. Speaking to a reporter felt dangerous, but also potentially powerful. "I don't think that's a good idea. I've already caused enough trouble."
Miss Johnson, may I call you Maya? I've been covering inequality in this city for 3 years. I've seen how the wealthy protect their interests while working people suffer the consequences. What happened to you last night wasn't just about a dance. It was about power, control, and the invisible barriers that keep people in their place. Something in Sarah's tone resonated with Maya's growing sense of injustice. "Come in," she said finally, "but I can't promise I'll go on the record." As Sarah entered the cramped apartment, Maya noticed her taking in the details: the ballet shoes tucked under the coffee table, the framed photo of a young Maya in the dance costume, the stack of bills on the kitchen counter. It was the life of someone who had dreams but was trapped by circumstances. "Tell me about last night," Sarah said gently, settling into the small couch. "Not just what happened, but how it felt." Maya found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She talked about her grandmother's illness, her decision to leave Juilliard, the years of working at the hotel while her passion for dance slowly withered. She described the moment when Daniel asked her to dance, the brief return of joy she'd felt, and the crushing aftermath of her termination. "It was like being reminded of who I used to be," she said, her voice growing stronger. "For those few minutes, I wasn't just a waitress. I was an artist again. I was someone who mattered." Sarah nodded, scribbling notes. "And now?" "Now I'm unemployed, facing eviction and wondering how I'm going to support my brother through his senior year of high school." "Maya, I want to tell your story, but I need you to understand, once it's out there, there's no going back. The Westfield family has significant influence in this city. They'll try to discredit you, to make this about something other than what it really is." Maya thought about Daniel's kind eyes, the way he genuinely appreciated her dancing, the respect he'd shown her as an artist. Daniel didn't do anything wrong. He was nothing but kind to me. This isn't about Daniel, Sarah said. This is about a system that punishes people like you for stepping outside the boundaries that have been set for you. Your dance last night was an act of rebellion, whether you meant it to be or not. Before Maya could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. Her heart sank as she read it. Eviction notice will be posted tomorrow if rent isn't paid. Sorry, Mr. Kowalski. Sarah noticed Maya's expression change. What is it? My landlord. I'm about to be evicted. Maya set down her phone and looked directly at Sarah. If I tell my story, will it help? Will it change anything? I don't know, Sarah said honestly. But staying silent guarantees that nothing changes. And Maya, you should know, you're not the first person this has happened to. Maya's interest sharpened. What do you mean? I've been investigating the Westfield family for months. There are patterns. Employees who have been fired for minor infractions, whistleblowers who've been blacklisted, community leaders who've been silenced. Your case might be the key to exposing something much bigger. As Sarah explained her research, Maya began to understand that her personal struggle was connected to a broader web of power and control. The Westfield pharmaceutical empire had been built not just on successful drug development, but on the systematic suppression of anyone who threatened their carefully constructed image. There's something else, Sarah continued. I've been in contact with other former employees of Westfield Industries and affiliated companies. They're willing to come forward if someone leads the way. Maya felt a mixture of fear and excitement. The idea of leading a challenge against one of the city's most powerful families was terrifying, but the alternative, accepting injustice and fading back into invisibility, felt worse. What would I have to do? First, go on the record about what happened last night. Then, help me connect with other people who've experienced similar treatment. Finally, be prepared for the Westfield family to fight back. They have resources, lawyers, and influence. But they also have vulnerabilities. What kind of vulnerabilities? Sarah smiled for the first time since entering the apartment. They depend on their reputation, and sometimes the truth is more powerful than money. Maya stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the city skyline dominated by the Westfield Industries building. For years, she'd felt powerless against forces beyond her control. But now, for the first time, she sensed an opportunity to fight back. Okay, she said finally, let's do it. What Maya didn't know was that across town in the penthouse office of Westfield Industries, Robert Westfield was having his own crisis management meeting. Victoria Sterling had briefed him on the potential fallout from the previous evening's events, and he was not pleased.
I want this contained, Robert said, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. No media attention, no social media viral moments, no martyrdom. Handle it. Victoria nodded. I've already spoken with the hotel management. They're prepared to release a statement about the employees' violation of professional conduct policies. I've also reached out to our contacts at the major news outlets. And my son? Daniel is resistant to our preferred narrative. He seems to genuinely believe that the young woman was treated unfairly. Robert's expression darkened. Daniel had always been idealistic, but the accident had made him more stubborn about issues of justice and equality. Daniel needs to understand that his actions have consequences beyond his personal feelings. Our family's reputation affects thousands of employees and millions of shareholders. I've prepared a comprehensive response strategy, Victoria continued. If this story gains traction, we'll pivot to highlighting the company's charitable contributions and diversity initiatives. We'll make this about isolated incidents rather than systemic problems. But Robert Westfield had built his empire by being 3 steps ahead of his opponents. He knew that defensive strategies were rarely enough. "I want to know everything about this Maya Johnson, her background, her vulnerabilities, her connections. If she becomes a problem, I want to be ready." Victoria Sterling smiled coldly. She'd been anticipating this request. "Already in progress, sir. I should have a full report by this afternoon." As the meeting concluded, Robert stared out at the city he'd helped shape through his business decisions. He'd worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let a single waitress threaten everything he'd built. Maya Johnson was about to discover just how ruthless the world's elite could be when their interests were threatened. But Maya was no longer the frightened, isolated woman who'd been fired the night before. She was beginning to understand her own power, and she was ready to use it. The story that began with a simple dance was about to become a battle for the soul of an entire city. 2 days later, Sarah Chen's article appeared on the front page of the City Tribune under the headline, "Fired for Dancing. Hotel Worker Loses Job After Moment of Joy with Billionaire Son." The piece included Maya's full account of the evening, her background as a trained dancer, and her current struggles with unemployment and potential eviction. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, the article had been shared thousands of times on social media, with supporters using hashtags like Dance for Justice and #MayaStrong. Local news stations picked up the story, and by evening, Maya's phone was ringing constantly with interview requests. But the Westfield family's response was swift and calculated. By noon, hotel management had released a statement claiming that Maya had been terminated for repeated violations of professional conduct policies and that her dance was simply the final incident in a pattern of inappropriate behavior. Victoria Sterling had done her homework. Within 24 hours, she'd orchestrated a campaign to discredit Maya's character, highlighting her dropout from Juilliard, her family's financial struggles, and suggesting that her interaction with Daniel had been a calculated attempt to gain attention and sympathy. The attack was sophisticated and multifaceted. Anonymous sources began claiming that Maya had been a difficult employee, that she'd been warned multiple times about her behavior, and that she'd deliberately targeted Daniel Westfield for personal gain. Maya watched the character assassination unfold from her apartment, feeling overwhelmed and vulnerable. The supportive messages on social media were encouraging, but the vicious attacks were deeply personal and hurtful. She'd expected pushback, but not the level of coordinated cruelty she was experiencing. "They're trying to destroy me," she told Sarah during their follow-up interview. "Everything I've worked for, everything I've sacrificed, they're twisting it into something ugly." "That's exactly what they want," Sarah replied. "They want you to feel isolated and defeated. But Maya, look at what's happening. People are responding to your story. They're seeing through the lies." Indeed, the public response was more complex than the Westfield family had anticipated. While their media strategy successfully muddied the waters, it also generated sympathy for Maya and suspicion about their motives. Social media users began investigating the claims against Maya, and many found them lacking in credibility. More importantly, Sarah's reporting had opened the floodgates for other former employees to come forward. 3 people who'd worked for Westfield Industries subsidiaries contacted the Tribune with their own stories of unfair treatment, workplace discrimination, and retaliation against those who spoke out. The story was evolving into a broader examination of power, privilege, and accountability in the city's corporate structure. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source: Daniel Westfield himself.
They performed a simplified version of their original dance, creating a moment of beauty and defiance that became an iconic image of the movement. The photograph of Maya and Daniel dancing together, she in simple jeans and a t-shirt, he in his wheelchair with his arms raised gracefully, appeared on front pages across the country. It became a symbol of possibility, of breaking down barriers, of finding beauty in unexpected places. The pressure on Robert Westfield and his company became unsustainable. Stock prices began to decline as investors worried about the long-term impact of the controversy. Major clients started questioning their relationships with Westfield Industries. Even the board of directors began expressing concerns about the family's handling of the situation. What Robert Westfield didn't anticipate was the discovery that would change everything. Sarah Chan's investigation had uncovered financial irregularities within Westfield Industries that went far beyond workplace discrimination. Hidden within the company's charitable foundations were evidence of tax evasion, bribery of city officials, and the systematic suppression of environmental impact studies. The dance controversy had given investigators the opening they needed to examine the company's practices more closely. The revelations were staggering. Westfield Industries had been paying millions in bribes to city council members to approve zoning changes that benefited their manufacturing facilities. They had covered up environmental damage that had contaminated groundwater in 3 low-income neighborhoods. Most damning of all, they had created a slush fund specifically designed to silence whistleblowers and critics. Maya Johnson found herself at the center of the biggest corporate scandal in the city's history. The woman who had been fired for dancing had become the catalyst for exposing decades of corruption and abuse of power. The federal investigation that followed was swift and comprehensive. Robert Westfield was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and bribery. Victoria Sterling was indicted for her role in the cover-up. Dozens of city officials were implicated in the corruption scheme. But the most significant change came in the form of Daniel Westfield's decision to completely restructure his family's business empire. With his father facing criminal charges and likely prison time, Daniel assumed control of Westfield Industries. His first act was to establish a $50 million fund to compensate victims of the company's environmental damage. His second was to implement comprehensive workplace reforms that included fair wages, anti-discrimination policies, and worker representation on the board of directors. Maya Johnson, the waitress who had been fired for dancing, was offered a position as Director of Worker Relations with a salary of $85,000 per year and full benefits. But more importantly, Daniel also established a scholarship fund for aspiring artists from low-income backgrounds, ensuring that talent would never again be wasted due to financial constraints. The transformation extended beyond the corporate world. The city implemented new transparency requirements for all major businesses. Community organizations gained new power to challenge environmental violations. Most significantly, the entire power structure that had protected the wealthy while oppressing working people began to crumble. Maya's personal life was transformed as well. With her new position and the settlement money from the wrongful termination lawsuit, she was able to move her family into a comfortable apartment in a safe neighborhood. Marcus, her younger brother, was accepted into college with a full scholarship. And for the first time in years, Maya had the financial security to pursue her passion for dance. She established the Maya Johnson Dance Academy, a nonprofit organization that provided free dance instruction to children and adults from underserved communities. The Academy's mission was simple: to ensure that everyone, regardless of their background or circumstances, had access to the transformative power of artistic expression. The grand opening of the academy was attended by hundreds of people, including Daniel Westfield, who had become not just an ally, but a close friend. Together, they performed their signature dance one more time, not as an act of rebellion, but as a celebration of what was possible when people refused to accept injustice. The photograph from that evening, Maya and Daniel dancing together in the Academy's bright, welcoming studio, became the iconic image of the city's transformation. It represented hope, possibility, and the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change. 5 years later, Maya Johnson stood before the city council as they voted to rename the street where her academy was located. Maya Johnson Boulevard would serve as a permanent reminder that courage, dignity, and the willingness to stand up for what is right could triumph over any amount of wealth or power. In her speech that day, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. I was fired for dancing with a young man who saw me as a human being worthy of respect. That simple act of recognition, his willingness to see beyond social boundaries, and my willingness to trust in the power of art, changed everything. It reminded us all that we are more than our job titles, more than our circumstances, more than the limitations others place on us. The audience rose in thunderous applause, but Maya's attention was focused on two people in the front row. Daniel Westfield, who had become one of the city's most respected philanthropists, and Marcus Johnson, who had just graduated from law school and was beginning his career as a civil rights attorney. The dance that had lasted only a few minutes had created ripples that would last for generations. Maya Johnson had learned that sometimes the most powerful revolution begins with a single moment of courage, a willingness to step beyond the boundaries that others set for us, and the belief that everyone deserves to be seen, respected, and valued for who they truly are. The Grand Meridian Hotel still hosts charity dealers in its marble ballroom, but now those events include performances from students from the Maya Johnson Dance Academy. The crystal chandeliers cast the same dancing shadows, but the conversations have changed. Where once the rich elite gathered to celebrate their privilege, now they come together to support programs that create opportunities for everyone to thrive. Maya Johnson, the black waitress who was fired for dancing, had become the woman who taught an entire city how to move forward together. And in the end, that was the most beautiful dance of all.